Stefan's castle, and in yonder topmost tower, dreaming of her true love, the Princess Aurora. But see the gracious whim of fate. Why, 'tis the selfsame peasant maid who won the heart of our noble prince but yesterday. She is indeed most wondrous fair, gold of sunshine in her hair, lips that shame the red, red rose. In ageless sleep she finds repose. The years roll by, but 100 years to a steadfast heart are but a day. And now the gates of the dungeon part, and our prince is free to go his way. Off he rides on his noble steed, a valiant figure, straight and tall, to wake his love with love's first kiss, and prove that true love conquers all. Why, you...
Hello, everyone! Welcome to another episode of Disney Reel to Reel, a deep, deep, deep delve into the Disney animated canon. I'm Wyatt, armed with an enchanted shield of virtue and a mighty sword of truth. But, my comrade for today's battle is Disney author and historian, Mr. Jim Fanning. Jim, welcome to Disney Reel to Reel.
Thank you, Wyatt. It's great to be here. I'm sure it will be anything but an awkward situation.
I had hoped it was merely due to some oversight. But before we get into anything Sleeping Beauty related, I have to ask you, what got you not just into Disney, but also into writing about Disney?
Well, I don't think it's a very interesting story, really, because I've always been interested in Disney. I mean, I've always loved Disney, and literally always. And just as a little kid, just as time went on, I became more and more interested. So, I started reading. I was like, well, who is Walt Disney? And I started reading, and that's the fascinating thing about Disney history is anytime you scratch the surface, there's so much more below it. So just reading one thing led to another and then led to wanting more. And I set out wanting to work for Disney. I never really wanted to do anything else. So I thought, well, I can write. So I was originally looking at being an artist, and I was an artist as a kid, but I just didn't think my talent was up to Disney standards to get a job in that field. And I said, well, I can write, and I'm interested in history, so I can do that. And I've written a lot of other things too, besides historical things. I've been very lucky. But at any rate, that was my goal. So when I graduated from college, I moved to California. I'm originally from New York. And, that's what I set out to do. And I've been very lucky to know some wonderful people along the way that believed in me and gave me work. And it's just grown from there.
Oh, that's wonderful. But going off my trail of 3 questions, because I have to make it a trio by this point. What was the first Disney film that you saw as a child?
Well, the first Disney film I saw as a child, I'm not exactly sure, but the one that had the most impact on me was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that was a milestone for me. I was just a very little kid, and I was just so blown away by it. How jam-packed it was with everything, the comedy, the dramatic scenes, how exciting it was, how sad it was everything. So that was really the starting point for me.
Oh, then you're on the right show.
So I've heard.
Yeah. Brothers unite. But getting into our main discussion now. What are your memories of Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty?
Well, it's funny, like a lot of Disney films, because I come from an earlier era, shall we say, where we didn't have home video or streaming. So you did have to wait for the movies to come out in the theaters, unless it was shown on TV, which was very unlikely in those days. They didn't show the animated features for the most part.
No.
Something like Alice in Wonderland, yes, but not the big jewels in the crown. So I didn't see Sleeping Beauty until I was in college, and I had heard about it, but yeah, as you know, its reputation in those days was not very high. It was not very well regarded. So I had really only read, for the most part, negative things. Anything that I could get my hands on, it was dismissed. Certainly the Christopher Finch Art of Walt Disney book, he dismisses it. He calls it a disaster and dismisses it in one page. So I had read the comic book many, many times and loved the story, and was very excited that for once in a Disney film, the prince was going to be very active and obviously very well designed and animated. I mean, I could tell that from the comic book. So I was really blown away when I did see it, by its design, by its music, by the colors, by how different it felt. That attracted me. And loved the three fairies. I just love those characters. And I love Prince Philip. He's absolutely awesome. So, and the scenes we're going to talk about today, very compelling, very, very compelling. And to actually see it come to life on the screen as opposed to the comic book.
Yeah.
It was like, wow. So I was really wowed by it. And I think it's always stuck with me and always influenced me in a lot of ways.
Oh. Well, I will refer all my listeners to my past Silver Age ranking episode about my thoughts.
Yes, I've listened to that. Very, very interesting. We do have some disagreements, but I can see those points as well. I mean, for example, a lot of people will say Sleeping Beauty is slow. I would find that hard to argue with, but the sequences you and I are going to talk about today are not slow. So
no, not at all. But for me personally, I don't know. It's just, I feel like the story and the characters are a bit like psychologically flatter than in Snow White or Cinderella. And I get that that's fine for certain people to check out, to each their own. But I guess from having done this for about 2.5 years, I kind of just looking for more like, I don't know what the word is. It's like there's a quality that those movies have that I don't feel like Sleeping Beauty does, but I still think it's great.
I hear you. And I think that's a point that cannot be argued with. When you compare it with Snow White is much richer. All the characters are so well realized and so well, established and kind of played out. And that's not really true in Sleeping Beauty. I think you said really with only the three fairies have real character richness. Mm-hmm. But I think that is rooted in, let me say that, it's rooted in Walt's desire for it to be a moving illustration. So I think they were thinking more in terms of a tapestry, and you're like gazing upon a work of art. Even the Technorama 7D screen kind of has the dimensions of a tapestry. Well, depending on the tapestry, I guess they can be vertical as well as horizontal, but it kind of looks like that. They really wanted every frame to be something you could frame as a work of art. And I think that leads to it being very stately and very, just here's a beautiful image to gaze upon. And that gets in the way of audience engagement and character action and personality. I think I remember some of your comments about Maleficent too, where she's almost more of a concept than a character. And I think that comes from it. Mark Davis himself said, well, really all she does is stand around and make speeches.
Yes.
So she's always like something you would see in an art book. And Mark did draw a lot of inspirations from, art of centuries ago, where they stand and they pose. And the art of that time, that's all it was. There was no attempt to put a lot of action in it. So I think all of that really influenced the way the film is. And I know that Eric Larson, one of the 9 Old Men, who was originally the main director, he really kind of almost cracked up in trying to please Walt, give Walt what Walt wanted, which was the stately illustration. And then at the same time, Walt would see it and say, well, nothing's going on. There's not enough action. We need more action. So he was kind of caught between those two combating approaches. So I think that tells us a lot. At the same time, everybody was trying to make these very beautiful poses and art-like images, but at the same time, Walt was then, well, wait a minute, this is boring. Where is the action? Where's the little comedic touches and the personality touches? So it's interesting to know the history of that. At least it explains it. It may not make someone like it better,
yeah.
But at least we can understand where it came from.
Of course. But I guess we're going to have ourselves a fun time. But shall we begin the sequence breakdown? So, we begin on some toxic-looking mist surrounding Maleficent's fortress on the Forbidden Mountain. The 3 fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, investigate this fortress with the goal of rescuing Prince Philip from her clutches. After a few close encounters with various goblins and gargoyles, they discover the throne room where Mal and her goons are celebrating the prince's subjugation. She and Diablo, her pet raven, retreat down to his prison cell to sarcastically monologue about that girl he met once upon a dream. And this is where the Snow White comparisons come back. Because they had a whole scene planned that they discarded because they couldn't draw a male person in 1936-37.
Yes. And I do think there's a few things in Sleeping Beauty that Disney had not done before. And we're at least 2 of them we're going to see in these sequences. One is the prince. I think especially in Cinderella, he's barely in the movie at all. He doesn't even get to put the slipper on Cinderella, which I've always thought. There's that record album from, I think, the 60s, and the illustration on the cover, it's the soundtrack album, and the illustration on the cover is the prince having put the slipper on Cinderella. And I was like, see, aha, that's the way it should have been. And I think every other version of the story has the prince placing the slipper on her foot. So in the Disney version, he doesn't even get to do that.
No.
But Prince Philip, I think because of the story, which is another issue with the film, I mean the original story, of course, which they reflect. Aurora is by necessity asleep. When she's asleep, she's asleep. She's down for the count until Prince Philip awakens her, breaks the spell. But that means that the prince has to play a greater role in the story, and therefore it's obvious that the Disney artist said, well, this time we have to make him real and very active and very well designed and and beautifully animated. And I think they achieved all those things. He's so wonderfully designed, and of course it was given to Milt Kahl, who was the master of the human form. And curmudgeon that he was, he always groused about that he got the boring characters and didn't get to work on the fun characters. But it certainly paid off in terms of Prince Philip, because he's not boring. He's wonderful. He comes wonderfully to life, I think, in all his scenes. And of course, especially in these climactic scenes, he's the one that has to save the day, fight the dragon, and get to the castle and all that. So, I just think he's great. How do you feel about Philip?
I am actually in 100% agreement with you. And it doesn't hurt that his live-action reference actor was Ed Kemmer, fresh off of Space Patrol.
Right. And for those that don't know, Space Patrol was a very popular TV show of the 1950s. It was on for quite a while. I think it had 5 seasons at least, and he was the hero. So it's very interesting, the contrast. He was sort of in that show, he's kind of in this fanciful future, and in Sleeping Beauty he was in kind of this fanciful past. So how great. And then of course they have so many photos of the live action reference film that he did in not the film itself, unfortunately, at least it hasn't been found yet, but in the Disney photo library there's many photos, and some of the supplemental features on some of the DVD and Blu-ray releases, they put the photos together to kind of simulate the film.
Yes, I'm actually going to be sharing some of those this week.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. Thank you, Andreas Deja.
Yeah, so what a great choice for the live action reference. He obviously did a great job, and he certainly has the looks and the physique and all that. I think Bill Shirley does a wonderful job with his voice.
Absolutely.
There were at least 20 other people auditioned, 20 other men, all singers, obviously, and he was the one chosen. But it's very interesting that Prince Philip, like Aurora, once he stops talking, he never starts again. So this last fourth of the film or whatever, both of them never say another word. So we can't talk too much about Bill Shirley's performance in this context, I guess. But he does do a good job.
Yeah. His last words were, "Goodbye, Father."
That's it. He doesn't even converse with Maleficent when she's taunting him. No. He just kind of reacts physically, straining against his chains and all that. And then when the fairies arrive to release him, I guess he's too surprised to say anything. And then I guess he's too surprised by all the other events of the film that are coming up to say anything.
I mean, all this for a princess? I mean...
That's right. For somebody that he's only just met and only had one dance and a song. Well, we should all have such dedicated friends, right? He's very devoted.
What was that phrase that was floating around the internet for a while? It was like, if you don't deserve me at my worst, then you don't deserve me at my best.
And maybe Aurora's at her worst when she's just asleep.
Yeah. Things get pretty thorny.
Oh, pretty thorny. Very good, Wyatt. Yes. But I think this is another thing about the film and some of the issues you have identified. You really do have to look yourself below the surface of what's happening. You kind of have to extrapolate yourself everything that's happening, because when Maleficent shows her vision of what she thinks what she plans on happening is that he's going to be in that dungeon for 100 years, and only then will he be released, and then he can kiss her. But of course, she will be ageless, because her sleep is ageless, and he will be a very, very old man. So he's given a lot of motivation now because of which, and we haven't even gotten to her vision yet, so I'm jumping ahead.
No, it's fine.
But it's very interesting because she's the one that tells Prince Philip that the girl that he met, the peasant girl, is actually Princess Aurora. Actually, he's already betrothed to her, and which he is aware of, but he didn't know that was Aurora, and that he is the literally the only one, because he is her true love, that can break the spell. No one else can do it. So now he knows all that. That's a lot of motivation for him to get out of there and, despite all obstacles, to reach Aurora. So it's really more fascinating than you see on the surface once you think about it, I think.
Well, it's not that I'm failing to see it from his perspective. Like, that is a very rational take on his motivation and his character. I'm just wondering, how did Maleficent know about the antidote to the curse?
Yeah, I guess you can look at that, but that way. But the fairies do say Maleficent knows everything, and except of course that Briar Rose is really Aurora and has been in hiding for 16 years. She doesn't know that. But I guess we just assume that that was a very public pronouncement on Merryweather when she softens the spell from death to sleep. So I guess she found it out. But yeah, there's a lot of things you just have to kind of accept, if you want to.
No, well, I mean, I do to an extent. I just I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, plot hole, ding, movie bad.
No, that's quite all right. I like hearing differing opinions, and believe me, I've heard it over the years about Sleeping Beauty. The thing that makes me happy in recent times is Sleeping Beauty has year by year grown in its reputation. It's been much more accepted, and people embrace it for its beauty and its design and its music and all that. So that's very different than it used to be years ago. It used to be either at best ignored and at worst, derided. So I'm used to it from over the years.
All right, but I've just come at it like, I think the opinion on Sleeping Beauty has gone up over the years, and maybe Snow White's gone down.
Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. And I'm surprised if some of your, when I hear your discussions about Snow White on your previous episodes, I'm surprised at some of the things. I'm surprised. Wow, are people really thinking that? So I'm glad to hear you and your guests defend it, because I think most of that's completely unfounded. But anyhow, that's another film.
That's another film. But we could talk about that instead.
Right, and I would love to talk about Snow White. But I guess
that's not what we signed up for.
Right, not what we signed up for, and false advertising if we did that. So bait and switch.
Very well. But yes, the fairies come in and they bust Philip from his chains and shackles. They provide him with these weapons of righteousness to triumph over evil. And then they make their way out the dungeon before immediately being caught by Diablo and Maleficent's goons. And it's pretty,
Yeah, I suppose it's another sort of criticism that's leveled against it, that the fairies even tell him, only you can face these dangers. You must face them alone. Well, that's not true, as we're about to see, because the fairies very proactively protect him and help him at every turn. And it's delightful. I love it, but it is...
Me too.
And I think that's the kind of thing where the Disney artists end up saying, Well, we don't want to get too bogged down. We don't want to be too literal. I think that's true of the battle that's coming up too. But at any rate, as long as you're swept up in the film and the excitement of these sequences, I don't think it matters too much. But you can tell me different.
No. I don't mind that they help out at all. In fact, I think it's pretty epic.
I totally agree, and I think that on one sense it's kind of predictable. I guess I think Sleeping Beauty overall is a glass half empty, glass half full situation. I always look at it, even when I acknowledge some of the drawbacks, I always look at it as a glass half full. So I guess it could be said that it's a little predictable that Diablo the Raven is going to come back, because we see him looking suspicious when he thinks he hears the fairies, and he looks and there's nothing there. And then when Maleficent is going back to her tower for the first time she will sleep well in 16 years. Mm-hmm. You might say, oh, I bet he's back. But I think you kind of get so swept up in the action, you don't think about that. So I love the way that when they come out of the cell, Philip and the fairies, suddenly there's Diablo, and he's squawking and raging and ranting. And then, of course, he's gone to get the goons. And that wonderful shot of them coming down, rampaging down the stairs.
The intense close-up.
And throughout the film, and we'll see this again and again in these sequences, the mammoth and ultra wide Technorama 70 screen is used so well, so beautifully done.
Yeah, very tactful.
How did you like the rescue of, or I guess I should say the release of Prince Philip? How did you like the way the fairies did that with their wands and everything?
Well, it does bring up a point that I did write about, but I mean, I'm going to try to let things slide. I'm going to try to turn my brain off, but I think it's worth noting that the rules for magic in this story are more structured than in Snow White or Cinderella, but they still teeter at minor points. So, like, their magic is only permitted to do good, as well as bring joy and happiness. And Flora's magic provides nice solutions to Maleficent's goons and their obstacles, like turning rocks into bubbles, arrows into flowers, boiling oil into rainbows. But Merryweather straight up turns Diablo into a gargoyle. Like, what's good about that?
Well, as she says earlier, when all that comes up, when Fauna points out that their magic can only bring joy and happiness, Merryweather says, well, turning Maleficent into a hop toad would make me happy, so I guess that's the loophole. Turning Diablo into a stone gargoyle makes her happy.
I suppose. I just thought they were more altruistic than that. Very well.
Merryweather's temper always gets the best of her. And usually not, her impulsiveness and her temper. And usually with not very good results. But this is kind of a moment of satisfaction for the audience, I think, as well as her.
And I love it on that regard, but yeah. Just felt like wondering. And then, as we'll see later, we'll find that their magic is in direct opposition to Maleficent, who bellows so viciously all the powers of hell.
Yes.
And then at the end, they are also given a loophole to just take that sword of truth and strike her in the stomach and kill her.
Right.
Yeah, but it's for the greater good.
Yeah, and I know that's jumping ahead, of course, but I know that's another thing that people criticize. Well, poor Philip, he doesn't even get to do the final act of defeat for Maleficent himself. Couldn't they? It's already the sword of truth. Couldn't they have just let him throw it himself? But no, the fairies have to come in and bolster it, and and all three of them combined, and you can see this. You can see the sword changes when they do that.
Yeah.
So again, not so much him facing the obstacles himself. He has a lot of help.
Yeah.
But it's very powerful. But we'll get to that.
But I will admit, between their escape and Maleficent turning into a dragon, I did not write much down. But if you have any insight to impart.
Well, maybe a little, but I was interested to know why. Is that just because you were swept up with the action, or you just why didn't you have much of a response, at least in writing things down?
It is part of that emotional investment. Like, it happens so, frantically, and you're in the moment for that. But it just felt very straightforward.
Yeah, well, as your listeners may know, that sequence was directed by Willie Reitherman, and he was well known for his action sequences. So it would be he would be the obvious choice and the best choice.
Of course.
And I think that alone gives it a jolt as far as I'm concerned. It certainly does happen very, very quickly. It's very fast, as you said, Wyatt. But I think it's very interesting that along those same lines, the Forest of Thorns, which is such a huge element of the original story, that's quickly dealt with, and that's over and done with.
Yeah.
The thorns spring up, and it's very dramatic and very powerful, surrounding the castle. Supposedly, according to Maleficent, he will be killed by them, but he has the fairies to help him and the Sword of Truth to cut through them. She wasn't counting on that. She doesn't know everything, does she? So he's able to slice right through them, and even when his cape gets caught on some of the thorns, well, the fairies are there to gently remove his cape from from the thorns. So it's actually very kind of cute that they do that. And as you pointed out about the arrows and the boulders and the boiling oil, everything they do has a beautiful gentleness, I think, to that, especially the boulders. I love the bubbles. The bubbles are so beautiful. And it really shows not only their personalities, but this whole thing about good versus evil. Everything they do is beautiful. So those bubbles and the other things that happen, they really show that. And I think that was a master stroke of Disney animation and storytelling, that it was so beautiful. They didn't just make them disappear or something like that. They became these instruments of destruction, become something very beautiful. So anyhow, that little moment where they release his cape, it's kind of ludicrous and absurd, but it's exactly what they would do. Yeah. And he's doing the rest. He is doing the rest. He's definitely hacking through those thorns himself. But when he encounters this little obstacle, they're there to help. So, but I love the stuff over the, I love Samson and Philip jumping over the drawbridge as it's being raised. Yes. I love that jump. I love the galloping. It's incredible. I love her hurling lightning bolts. It's all so exciting and dynamic. So I love watching it over and over. And have you, by the way, have you ever seen it on the big screen? Have you ever seen it in a movie theater?
No, I'm afraid not.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to do that, do so, because it does have even more of a wallop. Mm-hmm. And I think the film reads better on a big screen with an audience than some of the some of the more underwhelming parts of the film, we might say. They really do read better when you see them on that massive screen. So I've seen it, probably 6 or 7 times on the big screen. I've been very lucky to have that opportunity. So I I can definitely attest to the fact that this is one film. All films are made to be seen, on the big screen with audiences, as opposed to watching, somebody might watch it on their phone, and why not? That's good, but it doesn't have the same impact. So many films are like that. Lawrence of Arabia, one of the greatest films ever made. It really needs to be seen on the big screen to be appreciated, and you have to give yourself over to it. Sometimes I've heard people criticize it. I didn't think it was any big deal, and I was like, yeah, how did you watch it? Were you watching it on your film? I mean, on your phone? Because that film, it's all about the epic landscapes and the way...
The immersion.
Yes, and the way David Lean shot the desert landscape. It's all about this vast landscape, and sometimes the characters are so tiny. That's his point, and that doesn't really register as much unless you're watching it on the big screen. But I digress.
No, that really that goes for the Wizard of Oz too.
So that you have seen on the big screen?
No, but
you can see it. You can imagine it.
But also there's easier access to that one than Lawrence of Arabia.
Gotcha. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Maleficent is so powerful and so domineering, but nothing's working. Nothing's going her way. And so she takes it upon herself to transform into this epic fire-breathing dragon.
Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell!
It's one of the greatest moments in Disney animation and Disney storytelling that she transforms herself into this incredible dragon.
Absolutely.
And I love that reaction shot of Philip when he looks up and he's just like, oh no. He didn't see it coming. And if you can come to the film fresh, like for example, anybody seeing it for the first time and without knowing it from the comic books and the storybooks and everything, could there be more of a surprise? No, who saw that coming? that she would go to this length, and she's not fooling around now. Not that she was before, but she's playing for keeps. And another cool thing about the whole dragon thing is that Mark Davis designed her in mind that she was going to become a dragon. So her headdress and everything about her suggested what she was to become. And it's just this, she is pure evil, but now it's manifested in an incredible, overpowering, overwhelming way. And who else but Walt Disney would even do this incredible, huge, fire-breathing dragon? It's incredible. Maleficent is playing for keeps, and so were the Disney artists. And that's another thing about Willie Reitherman, is that he said, well, theoretically, you don't know. You're not supposed to know. Will Philip prevail, or will he won't? Will he not? Theoretically, you don't know. You do know, because even if you've never seen it before, it's a Disney movie. It's going to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
But he looked at it the other way. He looked at it, I'm going to play it like he's going to die. She is going to kill him. That's the way he directed it. That's the way he set it up, right up until the climactic moment with the sword. And you can see that. She is winning. She is prevailing. She even knocks his shield off into the flames that she created. That, by the way, is a big payoff for the Forest of Thorns, because he makes his way through it, but it's still there, and she sets it aflame with her fiery breath. And that is
such a beautiful shot.
Oh, it's beautiful and so powerful. And I think this whole battle, it's just like your jaw is just on the floor. You're just like, wow, And in a way, I think that how quote unquote easily he prevails through the obstacles before this, like getting through the forest of thorns. It sets this up. It sets this up that okay, now it's not going to be so easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually have a comment from her animator, Eric Cleworth. In reference to designing the character, he said, quote, "An article in Life magazine on prehistoric animals kind of tipped me off about how to approach the dragon. There was one creature who had eyes with no pupils, which meant you couldn't read his expression. That gave it a very frightening look. You knew damned well you couldn't reason with this thing. I tried to capture that feeling in my drawings. I felt it had to move smoothly to create this feeling of bulk, but it also had to be able to move its head swiftly, and I patterned that motion after a rattlesnake striking, and it seemed to work very well." Unquote.
Brilliant. Brilliant. What a fantastic quote, Wyatt. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
It's such a fascinating insight into how the Disney animators work. And of course, he's not one. It's thrilling to hear him praised and credited because he's not one of the top tier. He's not one of the nine old men who really are the only ones you ever hear about. So he's the one that came up with that. And boy, did he knock it out of the park. And just the thought process, the creativity, the thing about the eyes also makes it seem it makes the dragon seem even more evil and sort of unstoppable. It adds to that feeling that like nothing you're going to do is going to stop this thing. And it also like there's like an inferno inside it. That's what the eyes indicate to me. Makes it very scary, and all the powers of hell. It's like a hell. It's like a creature from hell. You know, how are you going to stop it?
There's no soul behind those eyes.
There you go. Perfectly said.
Yeah.
That is the greatest quote. That is awesome.
Thanks. I do try to go for the underground guys in the trenches.
I've noticed that, and I love it.
Yes, they do get his sword to strike her so that evil die and good endure. And they pull a scream, an old lady scream that they used in Snow White. I know.
Yes, it's the same scream. You're right.
Yeah. And then our first bit of blood that we see in any Disney movie that I think
that's true.
Yeah, pretty intense.
It's interesting too in Willie Reitherman's direction. Another thing that he and others had pointed out was that there's not a logic to the landscape. In other words, when Philip, where did that ledge come from that he's out on? And
yeah.
And you know, where did the like slope come from? That cliffside thing that he scales up, because of course, you know, Flora says, up this way, Philip, up. Again, helping him. But why? You know, she's the one that gets him into that tight situation because he followed her advice. He went up and then he's out on a ledge and there's nowhere to go. So anyhow, I think Frank and Ollie might have said, you know, well, there's really no point to that landscape, but Wooly didn't get bogged down in those details. He just did what was right for the scene and what was right for the excitement. And that's in fact a Walt thing, because he would say it's too easy to get bogged down in all these logistics. Just do whatever it takes to make the scene exciting and to make it move along. And speaking of Frank and Ollie, another point they made about Maleficent is that by turning into the dragon, she actually becomes more vulnerable than she was in her regular form. Mm-hmm. Because as this giant beast, it's something that he can slay. Yeah. Now it takes a magical sword to do that, but even so, this is something that a prince will do to a dragon, you know, traditionally. So that was such an interesting point. I think they made the same point about the Queen in Snow White. When she chooses that disguise, she's much more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. as the elderly peddler woman she's in trouble when they're chasing her up when the dwarves
Absolutely.
are chasing her up the mountain. So anyhow, that's an interesting point as well.
Yeah. It sounds like they used a similar technique on Jafar in Aladdin when he turned into the cobra and then into the genie, and he became even more vulnerable.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah. So they learn from the best.
Indeed.
And then Maleficent collapses off the cliffside and looks to be a blemish on the soil.
Very well stated.
That was just on the fly. I didn't write that up.
Always thinking.
Always thinking.
And it's great that, again, I don't know, it's such a great touch to me and such a great Philip touch that he's kind of picking himself up. Again, where he went when that whole ledge collapses, you see him jump to where? But anyhow, he's somehow on a ledge again, looking down, and he just kind of shakes it off. He went through that. He's had a very eventful day.
Indeed.
It all happens. All the last part of the whole meat of the film really takes place in one day, not 100 years, but one day. And he just kind of shakes it off. And then the fairies join him, and they nobody says a word, but they're kind of like, okay, come on. You know what you got to do. You're the only one. And off they go. But I just love, that's another, I just love the way he kind of apparently just shakes it off and stands up. That's done. And then Samson's there again.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, Samson wasn't
down.
Yes, luckily he wasn't burned up in the fire or anything. There he is.
But I guess we have a moment of tribute for Maleficent. I have a quote from Frank Thomas about her. He says, quote, "Maleficent's aloofness and treachery made it difficult for the audience to understand her motives much of the time. No one ever knew if the trouble at the christening was caused by her anger at not being invited or some form of jealousy toward those who were. However, she was so domineering in both attitude and design that no one even thought of questioning what she was doing. Who would dare argue with Maleficent?"
That's wonderful. What a wonderful quote.
Yeah, that was from the Disney Villain that they published, I think, what was that, 30 years ago?
I can't believe it. But yeah, there's a lot of insight and analysis in that book. And I think that's a great thought about Maleficent. Again, looking at the whole thing glass half full, to me it makes her more fascinating that nothing is explained, and that's just the way she is. And of course she wasn't going to be invited, and she darn well knew that. She had to have. So that's all just her attitude, and even just the way she says, "I'll be on my way." Looking back, well, she's not going to be on her way no matter what happened. Luckily, Merryweather gave her an excuse, I guess. But at any rate, however that plays out. But whether she was invited or not invited, she was going to show up just to spoil things. Mm-hmm. Because she can, and she does. That's what she is. And they're all giving these beautiful gifts. Well, her gift is quite the opposite. So I love that contrast. And I just find it fascinating that she has no apparent motive, except as to go back to your comment from an earlier episode, that she's just evil. Mm-hmm. That's all. So she literally obsesses for the next 16 years. What kind of a life is that, even if you are evil? She's so obsessed.
And on one hand, that's fabulous, but on the other hand, I'm like, shouldn't you be doing something?
Right, and like I think you said, or maybe it was your guest, I forget, that she could have at least explained it better. I guess you can blame it on the goons for not realizing that a baby 16 years later is not going to be a baby anymore.
Yes.
But what do they know? They're just they're not human. They're these bizarre creatures. She's
Yeah, I guess
she's
that's
not
right.
human either, but she could have explained it to them. So it's kind of fun at the same time that they think that, and of course her reaction's just like so wonderfully berserk that she goes
yes.
nuts and hurls thunderbolts. But you know, at the same time, yeah, you could look at it like, well, that's a little, that's a little frustrating. Is that really an acceptable plot turn? Oh, they thought they were looking for a baby all this time. These things to me are also wonderful and fascinating.
Yeah. But yeah, I believe that was everything I had until we get to my final question. So, how do you think Sleeping Beauty influenced how the Walt Disney Studios produces films to this day?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Well, I all I can give is my own opinion. I don't know how elaborate I can get, or other people might have a much more full answer. But first of all, in 1959, the film was incredibly expensive. And because of that, it did not do well at the box office. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't popular, that people did not go to see it. It's often described as a flop. Well, to me, that means the audience didn't respond. I think they did. Now, they didn't respond like they did to Snow White or Cinderella, for example. It wasn't that hit. It wasn't that level of a hit. But I think it was a hit in terms of who saw it, and that people did go to see a new Disney animated feature. They just didn't go in sufficient numbers to overcome its incredible expense. Cinderella actually was not that expensive. It was not. They worked very carefully to keep to a budget because they had to. If we go back to 1950, they really had to have a hit, and Walt had to find a way to do it, so that it would not be as expensive as the other films preceding it, like Fantasia or Pinocchio. But here it was all the stops were pulled out deliberately because he wanted it to be the magnum opus of animation, Disney animation, and all that elaborate styling and everything was very expensive because it was so time consuming.
Yes.
Yeah. So the expense of it meant that it didn't bring in enough money, and that meant that a lot of people were laid off. And the next film, 101 Dalmatians, was again deliberately done to be done within a tight budget. And I love the design of 101 Dalmatians and all that, but the Xerox thing, where now instead of everything being traced by hand, the animation drawings done mechanically, as it were, onto the cells, it changed the way Disney films look for many, many years afterwards. But today, I think all the Disney artists love Sleeping Beauty at least for its design, if not for other reasons. And a lot of them love it for lots of other reasons too. So I think I think on the level of the importance of the look of a film. So to me, for example, going to the Renaissance, The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast have a similar style.
Yeah.
And then Aladdin comes along is really completely different. I think something like that, they were realizing these films can be a celebration of design as well as anything else. And I do think that, comes from, in part, Sleeping Beauty. If nothing else, Sleeping Beauty is this incredible design statement with the designs of Ivan Earl and how that was all achieved. So I think an awareness of design and how one film can look very different from another is its lasting legacy.
Can't argue with that.
What do you think, Wyatt? How do you think it has influenced Disney?
Well, so I feel bad saying anything because you're so passionate about it in like a positive way.
That's okay. Let's hear other opinions. Why not?
Sure. Well, I think it did some damage to their image in the sense that, as with Pinocchio, Bambi, and Alice in Wonderland, their artistic ambitions ultimately worked at the expense of telling a cohesive story. Now, that's not to say that every Disney movie it needs to have like a basic narrative structure with a clearly defined allegory to be great. You know, like I don't want to be that pretentious about it. But the ones that I personally gravitate towards do. Even a contrast with Fantasia, which is this high concept artistic project like Sleeping Beauty, it still conveys more to me through its presentation of 8 individual shorts than the whole of Sleeping Beauty. And after doing research on the company, the studio, these films for 5 or so years, I'm just more invested in gaining insight from their work more than just being entertained.
I can understand all of that.
Yeah.
And there's no question that even the animators themselves, who had made many Disney films at this point, the same people that had made Snow White, for the most part, or making Sleeping Beauty, they were frustrated with the way that they were kind of restrained by the design. Mm-hmm. And especially, I think always with Frank and Ollie, it's important, even some of the things you've mentioned, it's important to look, you have to read between the lines. But they definitely in their later careers as Disney historians, they would say, well, the design was just, it impacted the entire film. And we mentioned this earlier. That's where the stateliness, the posing, and the slowness of the film comes from. It's all that design. And that's what Walt wanted. He finally wanted a complete statement, whereas with the Mary Blair designs in some of the earlier films, he was frustrated that they couldn't get it up on the screen. He said, this time we're doing it. We are doing it. And even though it was adapted. So they had to design and animate the film, the characters rather, to fit in with the look of the film. And you're right that I think that did get in the way of, traditional Disney storytelling. If we look to Snow White as the model, a lot of that, and we've already mentioned this, a lot of that we love about Snow White is not in Sleeping Beauty. It's simply not.
Yeah.
So that those points are well taken.
Yeah. I just miss that warmth. That's all.
Yes, and again, that reminds me to go back to Frank and Ollie. They said that one of the flaws of the film, and one reason it doesn't work as well as others have, and this is goes exactly to your point, is that the fairies do not have a relationship with Briar Rose. Again, you just kind of have to project your understanding of that onto it, but do we really see it on the screen? We don't.
No.
Briar Rose is only in the film for a short time, really. First, she's a baby and doesn't do anything, obviously. Then 16 years go by and we briefly see her before she goes to sleep. And then she's asleep and then the movie's over.
Yeah.
So the fairies themselves can be considered rich and successful characters, at least certainly compared to the other characters. But they don't, and this was Frank and Ollie's point, they don't have a relationship with Snow White, with the fairies, as Snow White did with the dwarves.
Yeah.
Because they said that was the great success of Snow White, or one of them, that really made the film work. The central thing about Snow White is she has a relationship with each of the dwarves as individuals. So first we see the dwarf. Well, first Snow White is so beautifully established herself. Then each of the dwarfs is established. Then when they meet, Snow White reacts to them and interacts with them. And it's a skill of the Disney storytellers that if you really look at Snow White, well, some of the dwarfs more than others, but because, really what is a relationship with Sneezy, say? but it's set up so well that you understand that. And certainly the dwarves like Grumpy most of all, but Dopey and Doc, she has a relationship with them. There's nothing like that in Sleeping Beauty. The only time we see them together really, that there was the opportunity for that, is when she says, well, what are you three up to? And of course they don't want her to know about the surprise, so they shuffle her out the door. She's gone. They go on with their thing.
And then she tells them, oh, I met this wonderful man in the woods. And they're like, by the way, you're a princess.
Right. Exactly. So you can't count that. And those are her last words. She never speaks again once that scene's over.
And we thought she'd be so happy.
Right. And then it's a lot more stateliness than going through the forest, her being in the castle, her being drawn up the staircase. And obviously you know that they care about her and they're trying to protect her, but it's not emotionally conveyed on the screen in any sort of interactions. It's just like almost like meeting a stranger and saying, oh, you're in trouble, I'm going to protect you. That's great. And it's a real emotion, and they're obviously more invested than that even, but it's almost like that because you don't see that they know her. You don't see any. I do wish there were more scenes with Briar Rose and the fairies. But no, they get her out the door almost immediately. Almost immediately. It's crazy how fast that happens. Go pick some berries, dear. Oh, I did that yesterday, or whatever she says.
Well, we need more.
And it's cute. It's cute. It's definitely cute how Briar Rose reacts. She knows they're up to something, and she's like, okay, bye. And she has that kind of like, I know what you guys are doing. But it's very sweet and cute, but it's not anywhere near the richness.
Yeah. Not as much substance.
Yeah. So your points are well taken, but again, I look at it the glass half full vantage point.
Yeah. And as someone who loves this movie more than I do. But that's totally fine. But yeah, I guess that concludes this chapter on Disney Reel to Reel.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed talking to it. I thought maybe you were going to ask me to rate the three princesses, like you've asked some of your other guests.
Oh, well, if you'd like to, sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. There's only 3 of them, like so many have said. But I really do think that for me, the top is Snow White. I don't think there's any question that she is the richest character and has the most going on and she's given more opportunity to be lovely and to act in a beautiful, lovely way. And I'm not at all concerned about the stereotyping because it's an important that some people seem to perceive. I don't. I think that's just her character. And what's wrong with being loving and caring, which is what she is. And then I think it's the order of the films for me. It's Snow White, then Cinderella, and she does have a lot of reactions and a lot of emotion and a lot of loveliness, and her caring for the mice, etc. There's a lot going on. It's not as much as with Snow White, I think, but she comes across as this fully realized character, I think, for the most part. But we begin to see hints of what will happen with Sleeping Beauty. At a certain point in the film, she's just to be rescued. And, with being locked in the attic and all that, the mice have to rescue her. But then, Sleeping Beauty. But I do love, as little as we see of her, I do love Briar Rose and I do love Aurora, if you want to separate them. I do love Sleeping Beauty herself. Beautifully designed, beautifully conveyed, the poignancy of her sadness and so forth, her not understanding her life, her longing, just her longing. I love all that. But anyhow, for me, it's Snow White, Cinderella, and then Aurora.
Well, that's lovely. I actually want to interject with, I believe it was a quote from an early outline of Sleeping Beauty that they were working on, around like 51, 52, somewhere in there. She was given this wonderful bit of dialogue that they cut out, and I believe it went like this. I believe she was looking out a window, because originally they were going to have her, like, isolated in the castle till her 16th birthday. And she was to say, "If I had wings on my wishes, I would fly to the ends of the earth."
Oh, that's so beautiful.
I know. Now, where's that Aurora in this movie?
She could have expressed that to the fairies. There could have been this whole scene, and then they could have said, "Well, never mind all that. You have to get some berries."
But no, couldn't afford that. Ivan, give us more sketches, please.
Right, more beautiful tapestries. But again, I think you have to. It's up to the viewer to think about things like, well, what would have happened if she hadn't met? And it is fun to think about if she had not met Philip in the forest. So she would have come back. They would have had their party. Then they would have revealed to her that she was a princess. It would have been a whole different thing for her, because she had not met. Not only the only other person she ever knew besides the fairies, besides her aunts, but this boy that she's fallen in love with on first sight. So how devastating, and you can see that is what is supposed to be happening and what does happen, but it's just not enough of it's up on screen.
Yeah,
it's left to the viewer to gaze upon this thing like you were looking at a painting and saying, "Oh, okay, I see what's happening." But that's a different experience than the usual Disney approach, like with Snow White, where it's all up on the screen. And not that there isn't a richness beneath that, but you see that. You see her relationship with each dwarf and the things that she does. So anyhow.
Well, actually, while we're here, I can go ahead and revise my list.
Oh, you revise it.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, I believe Aurora is still number 3 for me, as we've discussed. But I think I'm going to swap Cinderella and Snow White. I do believe that Cinderella has a bit more richness to her than I remembered.
Amazing. And this is based on what? You thinking about it, or did you rewatch Cinderella, or?
I've rewatched it. I've looked into other perspectives on the character, as well as looking into like the history of when the film was produced and what was going on. I think Cinderella is like a 1940s woman, and of the 3 eras that are represented, I think she is the most like not necessarily empowered, but like she has like a boldness to her that I don't think Snow White or Aurora have. Certainly a bit of spunk.
I agree, and I think one of the fascinating things about Cinderella is that, unlike most of the Disney story, non-Disney, I meant to say, unlike most of the non-Disney adaptations, they tend to focus a little bit more, at least, on her wanting to go to the ball because of the prince. And I think in the Disney version, the contrast between her and the stepsisters is so interesting. The stepsisters, that's all they're thinking about is the prince. Cinderella never even mentions him, ever. She wants to just go and have a beautiful time, and especially given her life, who can blame her? And she knows she's entitled because the invitation is to all maidens, and that's her.
Eligible maidens, yes.
Yes, indeed. And she is eligible.
Yeah.
So that makes the situation all the more poignant. And even when she goes to the ball, as we know, again, the great Disney storytelling, she doesn't even realize that the man she dances with is the prince. She never knows that until the next day. So I think that's a wonderful thing. She's not just like after, stereotypically after a man and stereotypically looking to a man to rescue her. She's the farthest thing from her mind. And I think that's really neat.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So good point. And I chose Snow White as my top, so it makes a nice contrast that you've moved her into second place.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think she's still like my favorite, but if I was being objective, then yeah, Cinderella.
I gotcha. I love hearing this. All your insights, even the ones I disagree with, are fascinating.
Aw. You warmed my Disney historian heart.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say insights. Your insights are all wonderful. I some of the opinions I would disagree with, but that's what opinions are for. That's what they are. They're opinions.
Of course.
So, but always interesting to listen to your podcast and hear what you say about different things. I haven't listened to the High School Musical episodes yet. I can't wait.
Oh my.
Can't wait to hear what you have to say about Zac Efron.
Oh no. Then just skip to High School Musical 2. That's all you need to know.
Okay.
Oh, you're in it for the long haul. Oh my goodness.
Well, I have been saving those episodes. I've been skipping them so far, but I know it's going to be interesting.
Indeed. Oh, well, even with that, do you have any plugs that you'd like to share with my listeners to find you and your work?
Well, thank you for asking. I think the biggest thing is my YouTube channel, and I'm still trying to get the word out about that. So it's called Tulgeywood TV. So if you search my name, Jim Fanning, or Tulgeywood TV, or just Tulgeywood, it should come up. And so I think it's pretty easy to find. And I have a lot of, believe it or not, next March will be its 5th anniversary. So I've been doing this for almost 5 years. And we like to have a video every single Tuesday. So in late, I've been so busy that in recent times, it's been shorts. It's been mostly shorts, which I'm not sure people can even find because of the way YouTube sets things up. They separated the shorts out as a separate tab.
Yeah.
So I think some of the listeners who were used to having a new video every Tuesday, they went and said, oh, I guess he's not doing this anymore, because you have to look for the shorts. You have to proactively look for them. But at any rate, there has been a new video almost every Tuesday. And we have some other things coming up soon, some other different types of videos. And in fact, I just did an audio commentary with Dean Brinkerhoff, who I make videos with quite a bit. And we did an audio commentary of Mary Poppins. So I think that's fun. And that's not a short, that's for sure.
Oh, no.
So thank you for the opportunity to let your listeners know if they don't know about it. I would love it if they could visit and see some of the videos. There's quite an archive at this point, and I hope they enjoy it and have fun, and I hope they subscribe.
Indeed. In fact, if I were to plug one myself, a short rather, you did one about the origins of Do You Want to Know a Secret by the Beatles.
Oh, I'm glad
I really enjoyed that one.
I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, that was definitely a fun one and a fun bit of Disney history. So
yeah,
glad you liked it.
Yeah, that was a fun one to share with a friend, and they were like, "That was inspired by Snow White." It's like, yes.
Oh, thank you.
Great
Wyatt.
moments.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Yes. Well, for me, you can find our show at DisRealToReal Podcast on Instagram. Any emails can be sent to DisneyRealToReal@gmail.com. I will also probably not leave a link to the YouTube videos in my show notes, but that's a whole other thing for me to worry about. And, yeah. Do you have any parting thoughts before we close out?
Only that I love happy endings.
I do too. Blue!
Pink.
Blue. Well, have a magical day, everybody.
of truth fly swift and sure, that evil die and good endure.